All right, we are live, and I'm so happy to be here today on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining us. And if you're joining us, you're very, very prompt. I'm really just so thrilled to be having a conversation about the GivingPulse report. My guest is Woodrow Rosenbaum. And Woodrow, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell the lovely viewers who you are and what you do.
Hi, Julia. Hi, lovely viewers and even the not so lovely viewers. Hi, everybody. I am Woodrow Rosenbaum. I am the Chief Data Officer for GivingTuesday. I manage our data and insights work, building research products, data interventions, and insights into the nonprofit sector and the social sector more broadly, understanding the motivations, behaviors, and impacts of people's personal generosity around the world.
Yay. Well, I'm a huge fan of GivingTuesday. People know that. So today we're going to talk about a recently released report, the Q1 2024 GivingPulse report. So Woodrow, maybe you can just sort of walk us through how this report started, how it came about, and what is the significance of the findings?
So we launched GivingPulse because we felt like we don't have enough kind of ongoing empirical data about the ways that people are being generous in their communities, not just donating money to nonprofits. And we've got some good data about how kind of fundraising happens and what the effects are and what those trends are. But we don't really have a better sense of the kind of holistic generosity ecosystem and landscape. And so we wanted to get a better sense of what are people doing, what are motivating those behaviors, and how does fundraising fit within this broader context. And GivingPulse is our instrument for doing that. So we ask people in the US about their giving behavior in the previous week, every week. So what did you do in the last 7 days, and what did you do over the last month? And this gives us a lot of data about what is driving action, how people value their generosity, what types of behaviors they're displaying, how those behaviors intersect and interact, what are the triggers, what are the opportunities and missed opportunities for engaging people more broadly and more effectively. Mm-hmm. So our latest report is we come out with a quarterly report. We also have a new data explorer for those that want to really dig in. There's really an enormous amount of really rich data about how people are responding to need through generous action.
Mm-hmm. I put the link in the chat so people can download the report, but everything you just said, those are all the questions that I had for you. So first of all, I want to ask, how do you source the people that you ask the questions to? So like, where are you getting the data from specifically?
So we use, this is essentially a consumer marketing product, which maybe betrays my background in consumer marketing. We're using a panel survey company that does this for brands to get us a sample that's representative. It's a small sample each week, but then what we do is we use rolling averages to see what those trends look like. And the weirdness that you might get from a small sample each week ends up getting very smoothed out over looking at it on a monthly basis. And then, of course, we also build quite a big annual sample that we can analyze from that.
So have there been some significant changes in donor behavior that you've observed in this report that are reflected in this report?
Well, I guess the answer is yes and no. I mean, one of the things that we're realizing is that there are some things that just remain true and end up varying from time to time only very slightly. So what's really clear is that people are being generous in many, many different ways. And that doesn't change, that overarching fact. In fact, we see this when we apply this methodology in other countries as well. There are some differences from place to place and from time to time. But generally speaking, people are giving to nonprofits, they're giving directly to people in need, and they're giving to other types of recipients, sometimes quite formally structured entities, but not necessarily incorporated nonprofits. So mutual aid networks being the kind of quintessential example of that. And people are also, they're giving money, but they're not only giving money. In fact, they're mostly giving things other than money. They're giving their time, they're giving things, they're being advocates for causes. That likewise, we see this broad mix, most people doing more than one thing, most people who are giving money also taking other action. And it's very rare for someone to only give in any one way. Mm-hmm. So we see that that's pretty consistent. Then over time and in response to various issues that people are concerned about, situations, crises, celebrations, we see some variation in that mix of people's giving behavior. But broadly, what we see is giving is diverse and it's prolific and it is not competitive.
I love that. So there's no such thing as donor fatigue. We've talked about this before. That's not what you're seeing.
No, we certainly, I mean, every way we've looked at it, we really see that there's no evidence that donor fatigue is an issue. And that's not to say that a donor might not be tired of getting the same old message over and over and over again. But that's not the same thing as thinking that people are tired of giving. That is clearly not the case. And in fact, what we see is that when people are engaged, particularly when the sector or subsectors come together for some purpose, whether it's crisis or Giving Tuesday, we see that people are very, very responsive, and that doesn't cannibalize their other giving. What we see is that when people give, that's actually the best indicator that they are going to give again.
You would think so, right? It kind of makes sense.
You would expect that. Although there is a fairly pervasive kind of scarcity mentality in the sector that assumes we're not going to get that kind of behavior, and assumes that there's a lot less elasticity in the donor marketplace than there actually is. And this is part of what we're really trying to shift. Is it's not a question of people are less generous. We don't have a kind of a crisis of values or generosity, but we might have a crisis of engagement. And we're seeing, I think, the effects of a system that is largely designed to get more money from fewer wealthy people. And that is just not very engaging to more people more broadly. And it also is not, it's not the best way to have a resilient, thriving sector, because it makes us too dependent on too few large donors.
Exactly. Now, the report found that, I think it was, I'm going to have to go back and check, 7% of potential donors would have given if solicited. So what does this tell you about how nonprofits can better engage and solicit this untapped kind of generosity market?
Yeah, so we started looking at this in the Q4 report last year, looking at who's not getting asked to participate. And it's not just our data. I mean, others have seen similar trends, that not all people are being invited to give, and in particular, not being invited to donate to nonprofits. And there's a number of reasons for that we can get into. And so we were curious, what can we quantify what this missed opportunity is? And we think this is a pretty conservative estimate. When we look at people who were not solicited in the previous period, and cluster those people based on how much they look like the people who responded to solicitation, we think pretty conservatively we would have seen 7% more respondents would have responded with generosity if they had just been asked. And so that's the opportunity that's being left on the table.
I think that's so interesting. I think that we often, as fundraisers, think that we are annoying our donors or asking them too much, or they're fatigued, or they've given up giving, or in this economy, we're making all kinds of excuses about why we can't ask people for money. But I really think that the data is now showing us that we do need to be out there in more compelling ways, sharing our story, sharing our impact, and talking about what is going on, like really the urgency and relevancy of the things that we're doing. So when you talked about people are being generous in all sorts of ways, also in the report, it found that volunteer activities correlate with monetary donations. And can you talk about that, and how can we what strategies can we use to really increase both?
So, I mean, this is really important. And it's certainly, this is not that new. There's been lots of folks who've looked at the correlation between volunteering and donation. I'm a big fan of Nathan Dietz' research at the Do Good Institute that was funded by the Generosity Commission, that looked at giving behaviors as a kind of component of civic participation, and Nathan's conclusion that volunteering actually drives donation and other forms of pro-sociality, which is pretty interesting and exciting to dig into. What we're seeing is that volunteering is a really good way of making your cause sticky with supporters. That it's a great way to maintain donors is by giving them an opportunity to contribute to your mission in other ways. And I think that that's just broadly, when we think about how we engage, if we're only talking to our supporters about give us money over and over and over again, that's just going to be, first of all, that's just less interesting. And that's where we might find people tiring of our message. And also, it doesn't reflect the ways in which people are actually living their generosity every day. People are giving in lots of ways to lots of causes through lots of mechanisms. And we should embrace that. That's a feature, not a bug. This prolific nature of people's generosity shows us that we have an opportunity to give them more on-ramps into our mission. And I think that's really the key thing, is like more ways that people can contribute and feel like they're a partner in your cause is going to be more interesting and attractive, and is going to help retain them as financial donors as well.
Absolutely. And that leads me into my next question. Along with these on-ramps, along with voluntary engagement, like being a volunteer, seeing the mission in action, what other key factors were found to really encourage and motivate individuals to give?
Well, I actually, I'll often go back to work that was done by Sector 3 Insights a number of years ago, looking at what the sort of key actual drivers of donation intent. And the number one driver was urgency. And after that is about a personal emotional connection, which you could maybe label as kind of personal relevance, but in an emotionally impactful way. And so when we think about urgency, I think one of the key things is to first recognize that urgency doesn't necessarily always have to mean an emergency, but we should be finding ways to give our supporters a reason to act now. And that's really important. And I think very often nonprofits worry that if they're too direct in that, that if I don't capture you now, I want to make sure I leave the door open. And really, we need to be thinking about this is if you're not having a compelling reason to take that action, that really reduces the effectiveness of your engagement and your messaging. And then secondly, I think this really relates to how we should think differently about trust. Trust is important. We need to be trusted if we're going to get action from givers. But the way we should be thinking about getting that is by being relevant and being emotionally impactful and relevant to the target. To think about our supporters and what they're going to care about, how they see themselves as a partner and supporter of a cause. And I think that often when we worry about trust, it pushes us into messaging that is not, in fact, very emotionally engaging. It's proving we're going to spend your money well is not might build trust. But we're going to be much better off if we build trust by just being recognized as genuine and relevant to supporters and their values.
Absolutely. And I recently read, that more than 90% of the content online in the coming year could be generated by artificial intelligence, generative AI. And what I tell my clients and my students and talk about in my webinars and my talks is that the only way we're going to stand apart is to be genuine and authentic and to share stories and to put our fingerprints all over what we do. And that is how we build trust. It's not, we have been here for 60 years and we have a 100% charity navigator score or whatever it is. I think that some donors might find that, interesting, and it might sort of help tick a box for them, but that's not the number one reason that they're giving.
No, I think of it more in terms of those kinds of proof points can be helpful to give someone kind of personal permission to take the action they want to take.
Right.
It's not the thing that drives the behavior.
Exactly. No, it's like me when I say, okay, well, I have a 40% off coupon to DSW. So that means that I can go there and buy shoes like that. To me, it's the logical part of my brain is saying, oh, I can buy these shoes and I can wear them to work and I can wear them to weddings and I can use them in all these different ways. But the emotional side of my brain is the one that's actually making the decision at the end of the day. But then we justify it. So we're emotional creatures justifying our decisions with logic and reason or data or statistics or whatever we need to help justify it. I agree that it's all probably a piece of the puzzle. Something else that I saw in the report that I thought was noteworthy. Have you noticed any shifts in donor preferences between supporting global versus local causes?
For certain definitions of the word shift, yes.
Okay.
In that, I think what we see is that there's a kind of ebb and flow depending on kind of what is
What's
happening
going on in the world, right?
So various international crises will drive more international giving. If you see disaster relief at home, then that'll be different. We saw lots of local cause support being very popular every year on Giving Tuesday, and also during things like COVID response, that kind of thing. So it really depends on what's going on. I think that it's not so much a question of a sort of more long-term shifts either direction. It's more about kind of response in the moment, and also, and this is just a correlation, but when we see a shift toward international giving, it does tend, or it did correlate with a slight shift toward monetary. And I suspect that just makes sense. Like it's easier to give money than things if you're giving overseas.
It's easier to give money. Okay. And also it's in the news and it's just on people's minds and it's constantly in their face and they're thinking about it. But I thought that was really interesting. And you want to make sure everyone listening, watching, that you get a copy of the report so that you can see the most notable trends. Were there any other trends that kind of stood out to you from this report that were surprising or noteworthy?
So, I mean, I'm not necessarily surprising, but I do think it's worth looking at. We saw this, the fact that we don't see giving being competitive, and in fact see it as generative, and people are gathering to give, they tend to do so in lots of ways, has a flip side, right? If we have suddenly less of some engagement, then that is going to have a broader effect than just on that one thing. And so we saw this dip in generous action in February, and that correlated with a drop in solicitation. And there's been a number of hypotheses about what's going on there, why organizations in particular might have been out less. But that's, I think, really important to see. And one of the things we get we have value from getting this ongoing pulse of the values, interests, concerns, generous action, and engagement in the generosity economy is this really makes it clear how important it is for us to be out there engaging supporters. And when we don't, we see that it has a negative effect.
Exactly. So what we have found here, what we found just related to the data, and actually it is shown by the data, is that the more we solicit, of course, the more that people are going to give. So what advice would you give to a nonprofit that is very hesitant to send more solicitations, maybe even send solicitations or ask people to give in January or February, especially after year end? How can they sort of overcome that mindset?
Well, first, I would say if you think that your message might be an unwelcome, intrusive solicitation, you might be right. So
Right.
but the answer is not retreat. The answer is change what you're saying. What we're seeing from this data is how much people want to have a diversity of ways that they contribute. So instead, we need to think of ourselves as providing that opportunity to people to make change. And that doesn't always mean asking them for money. And one of the ways we get permission to engage more often is just to have a more interesting discourse. So give them opportunities to be advocates, volunteers. Let them know what they are doing and helping you accomplish. Be in a conversation with your supporters more often in more ways. And then, yes, also that opens a door for more solicitation as part of that dialogue that you're having with your supporters. And I think that one of the ways to think about this is, if you have a monthly donor and you want to be engaging them all the time and they're already there, what are you going to talk about? You can't always just ask them to up their gift or make an additional gift. You can also do that, but we have lots to talk about. Our missions are interesting. So that's how we get out. That's how we get there more. Also, we're seeing that donors are interested in that. They are interested in hearing from you more. It just has to be engaging.
Mm-hmm. That is the key factor in all of this. I mean, when I work with my clients on their digital marketing and their social media calendars, they're always thinking they're going to be too intrusive. They are going to be, just overwhelming people with communication. And I always say, yes, if you feel like you're overwhelming people, you probably are. And if you think that what you're posting or sending out is not interesting, it's probably not interesting. So I love that comment. Yeah, if you think your solicitation might be unwelcome, you might be right. So how can we start thinking differently about the kind of solicitations, the kind of invitations that we're sending people to participate rather than the same old, same old?
Yeah, great word. Right. So think about this as an invitation instead of a solicitation, an invitation to have agency over the things that you care about. That's really that if you just think that way, you're going to approach the entire communications job differently.
Mm-hmm. And, it goes into the trend of the rage donation. I have a friend who was messaging me and, really angry about recent Supreme Court decisions or, political headlines. And she said, every time I see one, I just make a donation because I feel like that's the way I can control it. And I feel like that's the way I can have agency and hope to help and change the things that I feel powerless to change. So I think I'm just thinking while I'm talking, but I think that is a really important thing to be able to convey. Now, do you see notable differences in giving and in generosity across different age groups or demographics?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a whole other conversation we could have.
Right.
But on this topic, I think one of the key things to recognize is that the younger someone is, the less likely they are to consider different forms of giving as fundamentally different. So the younger someone is, the less likely they are to think giving to a political campaign is different than giving to a charitable cause.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a perfectly valid opinion, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about how do I deploy my resources to make effective change? But again, we should not be seeing this as a threat, but rather as an opportunity. We're talking about people who are thinking very broadly about how they can approach the problems that they care about, the solutions that they want to see. And we have a place as the nonprofits in that ecosystem. but we have to engage those people. We have to be relevant. We have to show up. We have to show them that we actually care, that they are part of this mission. And I think what we've seen over the years is a hyper focus on large donor stewardship, which is skewing the entire engagement older and less diverse in many, many ways. And people are being left out. And then we look at those givers who are less engaged in nonprofit donations and say, well, what's wrong with those people? Right? Well, they're not being included.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. What are some strategies that you have seen effective? Like, what are some strategies that Giving Tuesday is using to engage younger donors in giving?
So that's interesting. So from Giving Tuesday perspective, it's pretty interesting because, Giving Tuesday is broadly engaging. In the US, the majority of people who are aware of Giving Tuesday take some action. Mm-hmm. In the US, the most common way that someone participates in Giving Tuesday is by donating money. But only donating money is the least common behavior. So the vast majority of donors are also taking some other action. And most people who participate in Giving Tuesday are doing more than one thing. The other thing that we see is that Giving Tuesday skews younger than the kind of annualized typical nonprofit donor marketplace, and is particularly engaging for slightly younger donors if you're under 40. So that shows, I think, that this is about how the sector is showing up differently for this occasion, and it's resonating with a broader and different group of people than are typically being engaged year round. And that's important because it shows us kind of how we might show up differently all year. Mm-hmm. The other thing I think that we need to, so in terms of more broadly strategies, not Giving Tuesday specific, we also see that recurring giving is both a bigger component of Giving Tuesday, the day, as well as tends to skew younger. And I think that leaning more into recurring giving opportunities is still a largely untapped opportunity. Now, again, really critical not to make that transactional, but rather to think about this as this opportunity to get some involved in your mission, and then be able to talk about lots of other things, because now we have them in. We know that their retention is higher and their lifetime value is higher. There's just a huge value in having that recurring giver. Mm-hmm. And then I think we're too siloed in our organizations. The typical situation we see is this kind of like, we have community engagement as part of programming, and then we have marketing and communications that talks about the brand and creates our assets. And then we have development, and they talk to the people about writing checks. And I think we need to de-silo organizations more and think about this in terms of, we are a storytelling organization. We have different constituents, and we're looking for different outcomes from all of them. The messages, though, are about how we're being an important part of community and engaging folks in our mission, including recipients, including the people who are part of our programs. And I think, there's lots of issues, structural issues, that are preventing us from better practices in fundraising in the nonprofit sector. But this is one that doesn't actually require more resources. I think that if we break down these silos and integrate these teams better, we actually get kind of more value per unit of storytelling that way.
Mm-hmm. And like, who decided on these silos? When did this get decided? I don't know. It really bothers me. Everyone has to have a director of development, a director of marketing, or maybe it's the same person doing 5 jobs. The programs are very siloed. And I always tell the story of when I was a director of development and marketing, I was actually in a different building from everyone else that was actually performing the programs and interacting with donors and interacting with, supporters and clients and volunteers. So the silo effect, I agree. I think it's damaging.
Yeah, and I think in smaller organizations, we still see that. It may be the same person. We still see a kind of disconnect between the everyday engagement and mission and life touching activity of the organization and the going out and soliciting money from the donors, and really thinking about that as far too separate from the stories of the everyday stories of our organizations.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we wrap up this conversation, I encourage everyone to download. Well, don't even download it. It's not gated. The GivingPulse report. I'll put the link in the chat again. But how can we make this actionable? I know there's a field guide. Can you tell me about the GivingPulse field guide? And I will also put that chat.
Yeah, really excited about this. We launched this today. This is thanks to the work of RKD Group, who worked with our team to create this really valuable resource. And this is an example. You know, we've been really working hard at GivingTuesday to make our data commons work really a lot more prescriptive and not just descriptive. So including more and more recommendations on what do you do with this wealth of data. We recognize that whether it's the fundraising effectiveness report that we publish with AFP or the GivingPulse data, there's just an enormous amount to absorb here. So we've been trying to be a lot more specific about what do we think this means? What do you need to do? What can you do with this? RKD has just done a fantastic job of turning the latest report into really directly actionable recommendations. And this field guide is where I think we'll be much better equipped for the rubber to meet the road. And I'm really excited about that too, continuing on with the future quarterly reports. This becomes not just, hey, this is interesting, but what you can actually do at your organization to realize the opportunity in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and it's so great. I can't wait to check it out. It was just released today, so that's super exciting. Well, Woodrow, thank you so much. I know you're very busy, but I really encourage everyone to check out the links, get the field guide, get the report, dive in, and really learn about what's going on with giving. And you'll probably find that a lot of the myths that you've been thinking about are actually not true. So, well, what is your best piece of advice to kind of round out the summer? We're going into the fall. Well, not going into the fall. It's still July. Okay. Let's just calm down, Julia. Okay. Once my birthday is by, I feel like the summer's over. So that's just me.
Might as well be Labor Day.
Might as well be Labor Day. There's summer stuff in the schools. But what is your best piece of advice for a frazzled, worried, overwhelmed fundraiser kind of going into this next quarter?
Giving, I think, the one opportunity we didn't talk about here is to deseasonalize giving.
Right.
Giving is far too focused right at the end of the year. And it doesn't have to be. It's because that's when we're active. And what I think is really clear is that there's a lot of untapped opportunity right now. Now, I recognize that sounds like another thing to do, and hopefully the field guide will help you kind of navigate that. But what I think we can do as a sector that's within our capacity is to, at the very least, not wait until year end to try to build a broad base of support that then we try to action for a bunch of dollars. Start engaging more broadly, more people in more ways right now. Experiment a lot. Don't worry too much about whether that's going to drive dollars. It's going to set you up for your year-end fundraising push much better. And who knows? In the meantime, it might drive some dollars, because I think there's billions available between May and July.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Woodrow. We'll have to have you back. We'll have to have you back on again to talk about the Q2 report, which I'm sure will be incredibly insightful. So thanks for your time. Thanks everyone for watching, for listening. We'll be back again soon with another LinkedIn Live. So take care, everybody.
Thanks as always, Julia.